We are in a bad situation. Climate change ravages the people with torrential downpours, flooding, heat domes, hurricanes. And yet at this moment we have in power a politics that vigorously denies the existence and the relevance of climate change. Even though climate change is something that the people and the land all have by now directly experienced. Anyone my age and older has observed the unfolding of global warming directly over the last few decades. Our bodies know this is happening, and yet our myths, in some cases, cannot grapple with this reality. Indeed, we have a politics and power right now that strenuously denies any truths, any complexity that might conflict with its regressive and reductionist view of the world. Because denying the truth and trying to forcibly impose a simplified, literally reduced version of the world is what this shadow movement underpinning political power today wants. Denying complex truths about our shared reality that we can all see ourselves is made possible through a major exertion of energy, narrative control that rivals what's described in the novel 1984, and efforting to enact a former fantasy self, a fantasy, a mythologized state of total control by white male capitalist rule and the subjugation of everybody else under that rule. Historically also Christian, I might add, rule. Denial and aggression go hand in hand. Denialism and aggression as political stances are the result of some of us and some parts of us and some so identified people feeling backed into a corner, by definition, unintegrated. Denial and aggression are coping responses. These are coping methods coming from people whose entire identity and mythos of grandeur would be threatened, would be tangibly undermined if they faced the truth. People who cannot face reality and cannot grapple with complex truths found there will retreat sometimes into shallow identities and tribalism for an illusory and short-lived sense of protection and safety. But this retreat, in reality, can serve to undermine actual collective safety by denying our relationship to ecosystems and to one another. Karma cycles and it intensifies. It is energetically costly to resist the truth, culturally speaking. But when you have an ego or a myth of self, which can be collective and social, so powerfully entrenched, it may kind of automatically seem worth the high price to pay to defend it. Here's the thing, though. The ultimate arbiter of truth is not going to be a politician, a political position, or even a political movement. Mother Nature shall be the bottom line, the ultimate arbiter of truth. Because if this society literally cannot live within a hospitable environment. It will fail. It is tangibly doomed. And what we have here in this moment is a failure of sense making and of meaning making, which is and is going to continue to be highly consequential. In the fractal praxis worldview, sense making and meaning making is centered as a kind of universal and singular pattern expressed by life itself at all scales and at all forms. Meaning making, or sense making, is seen as the ultimate function of living beings and how they contribute both to their own evolutionary survival and also how they benefit their environments too. So this is really at the root of making everything literally livable. And so if we were to orient ourselves to accepting the truth, to doing the cognitive labor to try to integrate the truth and make meaning from it, to simply receive the feedback from the earth, to accept responsibility for how we may have thrown the system out of whack and caused illness from these imbalances, and recognize our need to adapt, that is the reunifying path. The path that holistic peoples and cultures must and should avidly pursue. Instead, we inhabit a time of great fragmentation and inundation with junk information. The people have become seduced by a political movement promising simplification, cheap and easy answers, short-term feel-good sensations. That, however, will absolutely fail in the not-so-long term and leave them utterly hung out to dry. What we have is a political movement of people who, according to their own myths, would only succeed insofar as they can effectively enforce their total projections of reductionist simplicity. And I'm speaking racially, economically, sexually, structurally, manifesting a complete and total absolving denial of responsibility to the world. Denial of responsibility by force is a condition that makes systems of oppression function, including unrestricted anti-market capitalism. These systems of oppression require the denial of responsibility to function, responsibility to respond to the situation, responsibility to act on the truth, responsibility to act in accord with what is necessary to live here well, functionally, as a collective. And I want you to reflect that it is inherently a politics of maintaining and enforcing privileges for certain people that is a culture that doesn't want to take responsibility. Leaders take responsibility. Elders take responsibility. It is children and privileged people who tempestuously avoid taking responsibility, sometimes in cruel and extractive ways. This, of course, needs to be balanced by the entire society and the different roles played. But culturally speaking, we are somewhat infantilized by our insistence on denial, aggression, and avoidance. And when we instead choose to take responsibility actively, we reflect more so the pattern of leaders and elders in our conduct. So the politics we are afflicted with today involves championing insulation from consequences of the cruel behavior of those in power for some of us, at the expense of all of us. And yet I can't help but see this insulationist politics as kind of a flash in the pan of a dying culture, a culture that is inherently unsustainable and shall catastrophically fail, likely soon. Notice I'm speaking fractally. I'm speaking about the pattern level of things. You could look at what I'm describing in terms of the societal scale, but you could also see it as relevant in light of interpersonal relationships or even intrapersonal relationship. I'm speaking in the most general of senses because when I help illuminate these underpinning patterns for your seeing as well, I believe it makes you, dear reader or listener, more adaptive yourself. So in general, we are in a bad situation, yeah? That things have devolved the way that they have at this time. We are accelerating toward a game over point in this lineage, in this narrative, unless we can collectively figure out, there's that vital sense making again, how to make it so the game continues, and indeed the infinite game is the one we are uplifting. Essentially, this is how to level up and how to be grown enough to take responsibility for the globalized scale on which we actually function. Because, my dear friends, climate change is merely feedback. It's the world, it's the earth, letting us know that the ways we are living, the ways we are enacting and conducting ourselves on this planet Earth, are causing discord, causing ecological imbalances that are not healing of themselves, that we are generating harm and breakdown. Something about the way we are living is out of alignment with the requirements of our ecological and climatological systems. Something about how we're living, and we could certainly inquire into what that is or what different aspects of it are. Something about how we're living is not a fit. It does not suit the conditions for continued existence in ecological harmony. And for millennia, a given human group's fitness to their environment would be effectively measured in terms of local or regional fit, right? Local or regional adaptivity in terms of living off the land. And there were probably many times that human tribes messed up their local environment and may have even gone extinct or just evolved and became nomadic, moved away from the problem areas and adapted to a new area. But now that we have a global technologized society, unified under the rule of imperialist neoliberal capitalism, we have a global circumstance on our hands. And we can't simply move on to sweeter territory if our tribe messes up this local area. We need to adjust and adapt our primate behaviors to the new scale of complexity in which we actually function and are entangled with each other. And please hear me when I say I'm speaking about what kinds of cultures are adapted to the earth or are fit for the earth. Many years ago, a friend of mine who is of Haudenosaunee lineage taught me that the proper way to understand the term indigenous, in his view, is the idea of being fit for inhabiting a specific place. So the Seneca people were indigenous to their particular place. They were adapted to successful, ongoing existence in that place. And so to generalize the term in this way, what would it look like to be fit, generally, collectively, be fit for inhabiting the earth in general? We don't have a culture like that. We have not evolved into that yet. And yet we are approaching a certain kind of evolutionary horizon, perhaps, for this very type of evolution. And since we come from a lineage of tribalist primates that and we're still entrenched with those patterning a bit, and we haven't yet realized that the relevant scale of our cultural dilemmas and our actual evolutionary fitness is now the scale of the planet Earth, we can certainly be afraid, and that any boogeymen we are perceiving are just these shadows of what we're trying to suppress, and that maybe this, global identity of belonging to life is actually too big, too big for us, and we would do better to retreat back into our smaller, simpler, lower order, automatic selves and identities, those that feel familiar, and find at least temporary comfort there. Globalized consequences mean, in part, generalized consequences. We will all live with the costs of the ways that the present day dominant culture has had a tolerance for our living out of balance for quite so long. Being out of balance is not a value judgment. It's a fact in a living system of the difference between sickness and health. Being out of balance is simply known through feedback. It doesn't have to be politicized or emotionally reacted to. It can just be. It's just information. Climate change just is, and it is a logical outcome of how we have enacted and conducted ourselves at scale. So ask yourself, why is it that this supposedly so successful culture is so resistant to digesting the truth, to digesting information of climate change? You see the same denial and resistance to truth manifesting in regard to Israel's occupation of Palestine today. You see the same denial of truth when it comes to attempting to suppress knowledge and discourse about America's legacy of racism and oppression. You see the same denial of truth when you see efforts to suppress the very existences of transgender and queer people. So what we're dealing with is very much a political stance of might makes right. That is, whoever is in power gets to dictate what is true. You see how this is toxic, yeah? So I'm simply calling and inviting us into an alternative stance, right? Rather than expend all this energy to try to make what we want to be true for everyone else, we could really radically flip the script, and we could begin to look for what is true and then adapt ourselves to it. And this, again, is the reunifying path, the path that brings us back into right relationship and harmony with the earth most broadly, but also all of its different components, all of the living systems surrounding us. I invite you to become courageous enough to lean into trust for your experiences, trust for the feedback that you are able to discern from those lived experiences, and reflect on how to make your identity better conform to the truth that you are uncovering in that process. Evolution is shaping us right now, and the self you select for is the self you're going to end up with in a circumstance of crisis, and you'll quickly learn what's adaptive and what brings us more thriving. So, if it helps, you might consider freeing yourself up from the heavy, static, stagnant, stuck identity involved in believing in an ego and some kind of grand myth, and breathe and consider identifying more so with processes of collective sense making, processes of cultural evolution, processes of lifing, and seeing just how much wisdom and power is available to you from life itself to draw upon. On the other side of ego, through the portals of awakening and stripping bare and of insight, there's a much more gratifying way to live this reunifying way. But if you've only ever known ego, you might be just totally scared and utterly disturbed by what I'm saying. You might feel again like the price of that wasted aggression and denialism is worth the cost and a better use of your energy than becoming willing to transform and metamorphosize. And all I can say is, trust me when I say, truth will win out. And in general, it is better to side with truth. Truth is much more enduring. It has way more stamina, and it will easily crush your little self and your little society before too long. Frankly, many civilizations have collapsed and failed in the past because their active mythos, even all the way up to the end, to their demise, their active mythos did not adequately grapple with changing conditions, whether that be changing climate, changing environmental details, changing social conditions. And our civilization will be no different. So, I encourage you, dear reader, dear listener, to align yourself with a cultural and social movement and political stance of dealing with the truth. Dealing with the truth, a culture that organizes itself in that way, is going to become quite resilient and quite knowledgeable versus a society that unfortunately will continue manifesting its fragility through its excessive uses of power. All climate change is feedback. It's just inviting us to reflect, inviting us to get right with life, get right with our shit, get our shit in order so that we can live more fulfilling and meaningful lives just like an adult. Let's be a people that takes responsibility. Even if we didn't make the mess, we're the ones here now, and we're capable of cleaning it up, right? We're resilient. Let's take responsibility and let's adapt our enactment and our conduct to the truth in the environment, and the deeper truth too, buried within ourselves, that true self that wants to come out but is waiting to be embraced fully and leaned into. And this true self needs you to become a person capable of evolution and of becoming more and more unified in your holy ways of living and acting. Ultimately, if we cling to a false story of self, a mythos or an ego that is supposedly so grand and so accomplished, it will nevertheless be washed away in the wake of us failing to attend to our own context for existing. If we fail to attend to our relations, to our literal environment, and become a type of person, a type of people capable of such attuned engagement, then I believe we will have no future and no identity at all to speak of. Thank you for reading and listening, fellow beings. Till next week.